Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Joyful Telepathy Podcast. I am your host, Kate Sitka, animal communicator and spirit medium. I help people all over the world talk to their loved ones in spirit and to talk to their animals who are alive and in spirit. To book a session with me, just click the link in this episode's description or visit telepathic.com. This podcast is brought to you by my online course, Telepathic Communication with Animals and Spirit. I would love to help you learn to do this work, and there's plenty of it to go around. I believe that telepathic communication is something that most of us do naturally, and that you can learn how with practice, encouragement, and support. To learn more, visit telepathic.com/class. You can email me anytime, telepathic@gmail.com. And now, perk up your ears and park your fears. Here's this episode of the Joyful Telepathy Podcast.
Greetings, dear listener. I'm Jen from the Brassy Broadcasting Company. I work with Kate on this podcast. You are about to hear part 2 of Kate's conversation with Dr. Lana. We're picking up the conversation from part 1 about spiritual bypassing. If you haven't already, give part 1 of this conversation a listen.
So when it comes to spiritual bypassing, this term was coined by Mr. John Wellwood, PhD, who is an American clinical psychologist. He specializes in transpersonal psychology, which, to put it in kind of a very quick and easy way, is like the integration of spirituality with, psychotherapy. And he primarily is based also in Buddhist spiritual practices, as well as just Eastern general spiritual practices. And he came up with this term in the 1980s because basically he was observing how people were using spirituality as basically security blankets, as a way of covering up all these things that they didn't want to really deal with, as opposed to really delving into the messy, complicated work of being a human being. With Dr. Wellwood, he defines spiritual bypassing as the tendency to avoid or prematurely transcend basic human needs, feelings, and developmental tasks.
Can you repeat that?
Yes, he defines spiritual bypassing. Dr. Wellwood defines it as the tendency to try to avoid or prematurely transcend basic human needs, feelings, and developmental tasks.
Yeah. I just going to give that some space for people to absorb that. The tendency to bypass, I'm going to try to paraphrase it, people's spiritual needs and their emotions, their lived experience. People will use their spiritual beliefs to bypass another person's experience so that they do not have to be uncomfortable. Or be held personally responsible.
Right, or deal with like the underlying, perhaps, pathologies, whether it be psychopathology or medical pathology that they don't want to deal with. Basically, it's a way for people to be like anything that makes them feel uncomfortable, anything that's painful, anything that could perhaps make them confront aspects of who they are as individuals or who humanity is collectively. They will use spirituality as a way of just brushing that aside. And so some examples of that I've seen is people's insistence of, for example, anytime that, let's say, a person of color brings up issues of racism, of being like, oh, but we are all one. And, there's only one race, but the human race, which I understand where people are coming from with that. It seems like a very beautiful conceit of unity and of togetherness. But the thing is, it also tends to cover up the fact that, people are, it is August 12th, 2018. Right now in Washington, D.C., there is part 2 of the Unite the Right rally, which is a conglomeration of different hate groups descending upon Washington, D.C. This is the 21st century, and we have people who are actively saying proudly and loudly that they believe white people are superior and anybody who's non-white is inferior.
And I just wanted to tap into the real mortal fear and threat that this is to non-white people. And I think that, I mean, a part of why I'm sensitized to this is being a gay woman, I am a sexual minority. So I can go walking around in the world as passing as a majority, as a white person with all of those privileges, but I at least have a concept of what it's like to be hated for something and judged for something and deemed inferior for something that doesn't make you so, and that you have no control over. And so I think it sensitizes me to it a bit, because it's terrifying to have people yell whatever it is, whether they're yelling, dyke at you as their car rolls by, whatever it is, but the fear, the mortal fear that puts people in. And so having this Unite the Right rally, this horrifying force that's organizing and being allowed to organize without comment from the higher leaders of the United States government. Can I come up with a stronger word for horrifying? I'm not sure I can.
No, I think horrifying is very valid, and I think even though there are obviously certain leaders in the federal levels of government, or the federal level, of government within the United States of America that have made perhaps some brief comments on it, they don't really seem to be substantive, because words are one thing, actions are another. And for me, to give people a context of, like, when we're talking about these issues, because I know that, and I anticipate that there are going to perhaps be some people who are going to perhaps feel reactionary, right, listening to this. And you're going to think, like, oh, great, here's another, attempt of just attacking privileged people, and I'm tired of it, and you're playing the victim. And you have to understand that this is not some abstract, intellectual, theoretical concept we're talking about when we talk about people being hated for who they are, particularly people who have a history of oppression and marginalization, such as, people who are racial and sexual minorities. Like, I lived most of my life in the Southeast, particularly within the state of Georgia, even though I moved around a lot to different places. But I remember when I was a kid, in the first town that we lived in the state of Georgia, that not too far from that town was a well-known white supremacist who had black baby dolls hanging from nooses on his property, and made it known, like, if a non-white person were to trespass on his property, he would shoot them on sight. And then also that in that
how is that not uttering threats?
Yeah. And then also, and this is in the late 1990s, because I moved to this particular town in 1996. In 1996 I moved there, and I lived there from 1996 to 2005, when I graduated high school. And I also remember, like, within, like, the first year or two living in that city, that there was a small demonstration of the local Ku Klux Klan chapter on the steps of the library. I went to all the time, and even though there were more people there in counter-protest than support, the fact that they felt comfortable enough to do that is horrendous. And I mean,
how dare they? On the steps of the library, how dare they?
Exactly. And I mean, there are so many more examples, and but I give this just to give some context of, for some people, this is just a historical thing that they want to go away and they don't want to talk about anymore. Yeah. For me and other people, this is a real threat. There, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center within the state of Georgia alone, there are, I think, I'm trying to remember the exact number here, but I think like around 50 or possibly more hate groups just within that one state. And across the United States of America, I think it's approximately 500, and I'm drawing this from memory, so I may be a little bit off with the numbers, but still quite substantial.
That sounds right. I think I've seen those statistics. That sounds right to me.
Yeah, and then with Nia Wilson, a beautiful 18-year-old Black girl who was murdered at the BART station by a white man sticking a knife in her neck. Even though I don't live in Oakland where this took place, I don't know Nia Wilson, but it immediately reminded me, like, oh, I live in a world where people think they can just do that.
Yeah.
And, what does that mean for me and my safety? What does that mean for me and my personhood? But
and that of your family as well. And I'm trying to echo back what you're saying, but I feel so woefully inadequate when it comes to just trying to mirror back the seriousness of what your experience is, because I can't fully mirror it back. But you underline that this is a real. This isn't a game. This isn't a my culture is not something for you to borrow from for your personal spiritual practice, because my culture, my identity, and who I am as I walk through the world can literally get me killed. And I won't necessarily get justice for it. And my ancestors have been killed, and they didn't get any justice for it. And that spiritual wound is still there. It's open. It's not just, it's a psychic wound. It's also a spiritual wound. And if we, as light workers, not sure if you like that term or not, I'm kind of ambivalent about it, but if we want to be light workers and contribute to healing in the world, we need to at least not be perpetuating harm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's basically don't spit in the wound.
Yeah.
Don't spit in the wound. Now, I know some people think perhaps like, well, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be nasty.
Mm-hmm.
So, how could you say that I'm perhaps like engaging in something that's unethical or harmful or oppressive or even racist or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, I'm trying to tell you and give you context, like put aside, because it's also not about trying to be good or bad. That's what I'm looking at, because one thing I see is that there's a tendency with people, like when they confront this, the reason why they get so defensive about it is because it goes against their perception of being a good person.
Yeah, I can't be racist because I'm a good person. What I do with good intention cannot be harmful because I'm a good person.
Because I'm a good person. And the thing that you have to understand is that part of being a human being means that you're fallible.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be a very intelligent, good person that obeys the law and that does tons of good deeds, that even carries the appellation of being a light worker. But it doesn't mean that you're perfect. It's impossible for anybody to be perfect. It's impossible for anybody to completely or at all, at least I don't believe you can at all escape the ego. And so when people are coming in with that, I think it's because they don't want to feel like, oh, I'm a bad person. But the thing is, it goes beyond good or bad. What it goes to is, what are you doing and what are the effects of it?
Mm-hmm. It's okay to be fallible if you're responsible.
Right. It's okay to be fallible, and if you're responsible, it's about personal accountability. It's about, and also it's about actually putting compassion into action. You can say love and light, and I love people, and I'm super compassionate all day long, but if your actions don't follow it up, if you're cruel to people, if you're dismissive of people, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's empty.
Thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and, oh, God, thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and prayers, or thoughts and prayers are with them.
Our thoughts and prayers, love and light, namaste, even though we don't know how to spell it or
Yes. It's not an appropriate time to say namaste.
Oh, gosh. No.
Are you ready for another comment?
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
All right. So this one's, and this I'm sure comes from a place of ignorance, and I'm not wanting to drag anybody here, but there are some spelling errors, and there's a lot of false equivalency in here, but I wanted to bring it into this conversation because I think at the heart of this comment is some really common assumptions. So she says, M. Newcomb 1983 on Instagram says, good for you. That's like saying, don't wear that white shirt. That's for a white girl only. Sick of this dumb shit. Get some thick skin. We believe in what we want. The Indians taught us the way until the white man came for their land, but Indian people were the best people. I will always smudge, not only because I like it, but to keep the tradition alive, who would want it to die? White folks ain't the only folk who use sage or smudge. Every damn culture uses it, or some type of smudge, not just for natives. Now dressing up, that's wrong. I'd never disrespect another culture. I'd never disrespect another culture. All culture uses some kinds of smudge, whether it's sage, Palo Santo herbs, rose petals, incense. It's all the same. And this white folk thing, that's just being crazy. Man, black folks do the same thing as well, especially in Africa. They got that voodoo, and you need herbs for that voodoo. You need herbs for that voodoo. I really don't want to drag her, but come on. I think that African is different from natives, but being two different cultures, and they are still the same. They use the same thing. Same with Buddhism and Hinduism, which are equating these two. And I could go on for days. But if you don't want to smudge, that's up to you. But there's a whole lot more cultures out there that do it, not just white folks.
Okay, so all right, let's address this seriously.
Do we need herbs for that voodoo or no?
That's going to become a meme. Wow.
I know. I'm sorry. I have to just apologize that I even read that, but this is what people think. Some people.
Oh. Okay, so I want to address this seriously because I think that this is a very, one of the common responses that people will have of but, there are all of these different cultures, whether it be different indigenous cultures, different African cultures, which, by the way, just to make sure everybody knows, Africa is a continent, multiple countries, because, sometimes people in geography don't mix.
Hi.
And then also even go into, pagan cultures, there are various, histories of using different sacred herbs and burning them in rituals. And so what we're trying to make the distinction of is that you can still take those fundamental elements, but when you're calling it smudging, that's only really used particularly with First Nation people.
There you go.
First Nation / Native American people. And typically that involves not only the use of a dried bundle of sage or some other sacred herbs, but also an abalone shell and a feather. And those are the very specific things, because there are other cultures that they won't even bundle them together. They may just put them in a fire as an offering. Or, they may do it in some other kind of way, but smudging is a very specific ritual that involves very specific tools. And the thing is that if you're going to say that you're going to do that, again, you need to go to the original source, learn the history of it, talk to the people who practice it that are from that original source culture, and see if it's appropriate for use. Because it's not just a matter of also you have to understand that there's a very specific ritual that goes around it. So it's not just a matter of just anybody taking it and doing it, but it's you have people who do it in a particular way. If we're going to the source culture, that there's usually someone who appoints it and uses it in the ceremony, as opposed to just somebody doing it because, it's the moon cycles, you guys, and so I need to clear my apartment. It's not the same thing. And so but that comment, dear God,
it was pretty bad. It was one of the more. I mean, I was hovering. My finger was hovering over delete. It's tough because I don't want to leave anything up there that's going to be harmful for my non-white friends to actually read, but I ended up just kind of leaving it up there because I was like, well, maybe we can start a conversation from this.
Well, yeah. And so I think I understand that some people, and I want to say I do understand that there are going to be people who are that this is something I really value and I think that's important. But I would venture to ask people, where do you get this from? Yeah. When did you first learn about smudging? Who did you get it from? Because chances are you didn't learn it from a native person.
Chances are you saw Teresa Caputo do it on TV like I did.
Or, you went to your local spiritual shop and they had it, and you talked to one of the workers and they got it there, or there was somebody who was non-native who talked about it, wrote it on their blog, their website, and you talked about how this is a great clearing tool. And so people are using it out of context, and usually when they mention this, by the way, they just say Native American practice.
Yeah, Native American, It's like, just like there's many countries in Africa, there's many different Native Americans.
There are literally hundreds of registered Native American nation states.
Yeah, so there's no one Native American culture. There's no one thing that, quote, Native Americans do.
Yeah, and Native Americans aren't your little magical creatures that are here to live and serve your every spiritual need.
There you go. This leads right into the next comment. By Little Spirituals on Instagram. I agree and disagree. I smudge, and I have been taught by an Indigenous elder. I am not Indigenous. I asked if it was okay and was met with enthusiasm and told to write down questions I may have, and she would love to teach me more. This is a part of my own spiritual practice, not to banish spirits. Cultural appropriation is a real thing, and like you mentioned, is inappropriate, not fashionable, cool, or a fad. So, we do have, I want to loop this back to the statement from the Dakota people, or rather the Lakota people that I would have read at the beginning of this podcast, which is one individual First Nations person does not have the right to override what the efforts of the tribal organization necessarily. And I would be really curious to find out from Little Spirituals whether she paid this person to teach her this.
Yes, and so also just, I guess, to add an extra layer of context, if you will, with the declaration of war against exploiters of Lakota spirituality. This was a declaration that was passed at the Lakota Summit 5, an international gathering of U.S. and Canadian Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota nations, with approximately 500 representatives from 40 different tribes and bands of the Lakota. And this declaration was unanimously passed on June 10th, 1993.
Yeah.
And so with that kind of context, I want you to understand that just because there is one person who is, First Nations, Indigenous, or Native that is saying, oh, it's okay, it doesn't mean that it's a reflection of the entire community. And so, again, you need to still kind of have, I guess, a more nuanced approach and outlook of being like, okay, well, yeah, this one person is saying that it's okay and they're really enthusiastic and they enjoy it, but I'm also hearing these counter arguments from it. And I know that people are going to listen to it, and I know that people are also going to go back and refer to the original declaration. But there is one particular piece where they say, basically in this declaration, that like if there is and I'll read it verbatim, it says, we especially urge all our Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people to take action to prevent our own people from contributing to and enabling the abuse of our sacred ceremonies and spiritual practices by outsiders. For, as we all know, there are certain ones among our own people who are prostituting our spiritual ways for their own selfish gain, with no regard for the spiritual well-being of the people as a whole.
Yeah.
This is coming from the declaration. This is coming from the people themselves, and with the people being the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people.
Yes, and the spiritual leaders. The spiritual leaders of these communities. And so having one member, having one individual saying that it's okay, does not negate or bypass what the organization of spiritual leaders has said on behalf of their people as a whole.
Right, and so I think that again, and I can understand and I appreciate that this particular individual presented it in a very respectful way of kind of like, well, then what do I do with this?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I thought I was okay. I asked. I thought I did the right thing. Yeah, and it's like it's like, okay, well, we can acknowledge, and we're not here to, we're not sitting here to pass judgment and to say, this is right or this is wrong. We're really trying to prompt people to think again about their own practices and what they're going to do going forward. So maybe,
and I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so maybe little spirituals will hear this, and maybe she will reconsider.
Yeah, I definitely think so, and I do agree. This is not about necessarily passing judgment, but I guess for myself, because I do feel very passionate about these issues and topics, I do also feel, I guess, both disappointed and angry that often people are not basically being as open as they could be or should be when it comes to these issues. And often it feels, like it's discouraged, that like these kind of conversations are discouraged, or that they're neatly stamped out, where it's pretty much like as soon as somebody says like, but you guys, maybe this is harmful, that people will come out with like these very pithy, poor counter arguments that are self-serving. And it basically feels like you either need to shut up and like just allow people to do whatever they want to do, or ultimately people sometimes feel like they just have to extricate themselves from spirituality as a whole because you can't have these conversations.
Yeah, and this is such an important part of spiritual work. There's so much potential for growth and compassion and growing respect. I mean, this is it's not solely we're prioritizing the needs of oppressed people, absolutely, but I as a white person benefit from this awareness as well. I've become a more compassionate person, my understanding and respect. So it's like it is in everybody's best interest to learn about this and to sensitize to this, and it's to everybody's detriment to be pithy and say, oh well, we've all incarnated as all races all over anyway. It doesn't matter. It's all love. It all comes down to love.
What do you mean by love?
I actually think that is leading into my next comment. I want to let you complete your thought, though. Do you want to? Were you in the middle?
No, let's go.
Okay.
Let's go to the next comment.
So this one is from Stephen Phoenix. And I don't know if you saw this, but my wife actually got into a heated argument with him on Instagram. So I'm not going to read all of his comments. But
can we take a moment to praise your wife? Go, Kat.
Kat is again, she's highly educated. She has an art history or was it visual art major and women's rights minor. Like, she's very good at articulating her arguments, whereas I tend to stumble over things. Like, I connect with the energy, the spirit, the thought, and I'll know something feels right or feels wrong, but it could take me a long time to really be able to express myself completely. But Kat she's on it. She's very good. Very good at it. So she and Stephen Phoenix got into it. And it's funny because you mentioned earlier how people that are on the top of the food chain culturally tend to default into taking up the most space. And it's funny to me that the only white man on this thread took up the majority of space on the page. I mean, even his first comment was paragraphs long. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. But I am going to skip through and try to get the gist of it. So Stephen Phoenix says, the notion of cultural appropriation is starting to grow into a negative force. So right there, what do we call that? Because this is right there. It's saying you're being negative. There's a word for that, isn't there?
Well, I mean, the most basic and beautiful word I can think is bullshit, but also
correct. Yes, absolutely.
Gaslighting, spiritual bypassing.
Yeah, I'm like, is that spiritual bypassing? Is it silencing? Like that. This is a technique to shut people down and shut them up. Like right there, very first sentence. And I think that's probably what got Kat going, because that's almost like fire. That's almost like lighting her not wick, but what's the fuse? That's like lighting the fuse, trying to saying something that's silencing. I understand that traditions should be respected and learned about before publicly expressing others' ceremonies and sacred rituals in a way that would come across as insensitive or lacking. We need to start taking away this term cultural appropriation and replace it with cultural education and an opportunity for those who are interested in or resonate with whatever culture to feel free, once they understand the meaning, to take part and experience whatever one chooses.
No.
Entitled.
Yeah, no. Here's why. You gotta, again, it's this sense of entitlement, like you said, but again, like, I just want to do whatever I want to do, regardless of the consequences. I think cultural appropriation, like, we can only understand things if we use our words, people, to know and define the phenomena and experiences that are happening. And what's missing from his statement, too, is the consideration of, like, not only educating yourself, I do believe in education, but also actually going to the people that you are interested in taking their practices from, and not just one person, but, like, actually looking at the conversations that are happening in these communities about people taking these practices and the tradition and history of these practices. Because, for example, there are a number of practices, not just with First Nations and Indigenous people, but also I'm thinking of various African religions and traditions where it's like you have to go through a process of initiation. It's not just a matter of like, oh, this deity or this spirit or this being came to me, and so I'm just going to do stuff. It's a matter of like actually going through a formal, process of initiation to be able to actually learn and practice these spiritual modalities. And so when people are just kind of like, again, what his comment is suggesting is like, we just want to be able to find out about stuff just enough so we can use it. But it's missing the element of really checking in with the people, and not just like with one person again, but like checking in with the people, the communities, and being like, okay, what's the history of this? Like, traditionally, who's supposed to be practicing this, and how are they supposed to be practicing it? What's the purpose? And basically extending in this sense of perspective taking and compassion, not just thinking about and centering yourself and your own needs and desires when it comes to spiritual practice, but really considering the perspective of the people who are completely immersed in and who created these traditions and maintain them, and understanding that. I think, in general, like, here's the way I see it. Like, when it comes to, like, the dynamic or comparison between spirituality and religion, I feel that whereas religion in general has this reputation, which I think has a lot of, there's a lot of validity to this reputation of being too rigid and exclusive. I think that on the opposite hand, almost it seems like it's a form of reaction formation. Spirituality tends to be too lax, where people are just kind of like, yeah, do whatever you want. Don't use discernment. Don't use critical thinking skills. Don't really take the time to investigate what we're doing and why. Just do whatever you want.
Do whatever feels right to you.
Well, do whatever feels good. And if you're using your brain, that's just the ego anyway.
So he goes on. Shall I continue?
Oh, yeah, let's do it, Stephen.
We start to corrupt the purity of capital L love with ideas such as concepts and experience of being, possessions that only certain people, certain chosen people can have, not others. The system of beliefs is divisive and will never lead back to love and light where we all shine our brightest. So how do we address that respecting culture is not being divisive?
It's a strange argument to make, I think, when people say that, by addressing these particular issues that you're being divisive. The division was already there, bruh. And it wasn't created by the people who are trying to assert their rights, or who are trying to make rightful complaints about their being mistreated. And so, again, I think it goes back to the idea of, like, well, if you want to get to this ultimate idea of love, right, and unity and global peace, you have to be able to root out the things that are preempting that. You don't get it by just shouting love and doing mantras 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
You do it by getting into the dirty, messy work that's very painful,
Mm-hmm.
of actually looking at what are we doing, what are we either complicit in, what are we actively participating in that's causing us to not love each other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would make the comparison of with that statement, it almost would be like saying, let's heal this deep festering wound in your body by just, putting a Band-Aid over it.
And calling it skin.
And calling it skin.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just not even think about it, because the more we put negative energy into it, it's just going to make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're going to put medicine in it. You're going to properly diagnose and see what's wrong. That way you can better understand how to heal it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing. We live in a sick society. I think we can all fundamentally agree on that.
Yeah.
But the only way to heal that sick society is if you give it a proper diagnosis and administer the proper medicine to do that.
Yeah. And
that comes from all of our input, not just from people like Stephen. He doesn't get to be the authority about how we heal.
Yes. Stephen Phoenix.
Stephen Phoenix, who's so love and light that he's going to spend how much space and bandwidth arguing with somebody else?
And what does it, without really facing what his participation in this appropriation means? So it's classic, I'm entitled to this, but I don't want to look at that it may be causing harm. And so even if someone who is oppressed says this causes me and my culture harm for reasons of relating to history, relating to cultural and spiritual dilution, all of these reasons, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but that's your problem.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Shall we talk about spiritual tourism, since he's talking about, I take the time to really get to know and appreciate these cultures. I go and I travel. I go to India and I go to South America and I drink the ayahuasca and I do the So do we want to touch on spiritual tourism and what that's turned into?
Yeah, I wonder if he also goes to Africa to get the herbs for that voodoo.
Because the ones from Africa are really the best ones.
It's superb, you guys.
Yeah.
Artisan herbs, better than what you would get from Brooklyn.
You get triple on eBay what you would the ones from Brooklyn.
It's such a great value. The exchange rate is amazing.
Where to begin with spiritual tourism? Because I feel like Eat, Pray, Love really set a lot of it off.
Oh, bless. Bless, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people, again, I think it's innocent. I think all of us, to a certain extent, have engaged in some kind of spiritual tourism or the desire to do that. But, I think you also have to look at things, ask questions of who's actually profiting from this, not only in terms of finances, but also any other kind of benefit of the time and the effort and the money. Also, is it really something that's genuine, or is it just something to drive up people's time and energy and dollars to go to these particular sites? And I think, again, it goes to the fact that spirituality, this is an ongoing thing, right? So it's not you can just go to an ashram or go to a special spiritual retreat and then all of a sudden you are going to be healed of all of the problems and suffering that you've had in your human life, and you're going to have all the answers to life, and you're going to have this instant level of enlightenment, which I do think that books and stories like Eat, Pray, Love have misled people to think. Now, I can't speak for the author of that book, and I can't speak for her experience, but what I can say is that there is a lot of money that's being thrown around for these promises of having the answers. If you just go to this far-flung locale in Tahiti or Costa Rica or India or in any particular African country, Nigeria, South America, etc., which, by the way, South America is a continent, different continent.
We're getting our geography right on this podcast.
We are getting our geography right, people. Then I think that, people think that basically there's these overly simplistic approaches to spirituality. And I think that it does a disservice not only to the people who are trying to seek answers, but also to people that are being put in these positions of facilitating this tourism, because you're not really getting the meat of it.
Yeah.
It's just like, a little fun-sized, bite-sized version of it. But if you're not really making it an ongoing practice and really immersing yourself in it and committing to it and dedicating to it, it's not going to give you the benefits that you would hope for. But also, just like with a lot of issues that can come in general tourism, you have to look like, is it doing more harm than good to the people who are being trotted out to do this? Like, is it creating this differential power dynamic where, the people who are doing this is like they're making pennies on the dollar just to, appease this very, I guess what would the word be? Like this very kind of overly simplistic idea of what spirituality can be. And then, the people that are doing it, they're not really getting it, and it's cheapening it. I think quite often...
I agree. I completely agree. Why on earth would a North American want to participate in an ayahuasca ceremony, which is physically grueling, but what is the motivation to go down there and experience this? This is a sacred ceremony, but it's, getting turned into a casual drug now because it's been brought back up to North America. And it's like, what spiritual experience are you looking for that you can't obtain meditating with your local Tibetan Buddhists?
Right.
What are you looking for that you can't find right where you are, that you have to go into the rainforest? And I don't get it, Lana.
I think it's been popularized. I think there is I think part of it, I've been delving back into social psychology to try to understand these phenomena and processes. And I think part of it is due to this concept of social proof, where basically people are within a certain type of social context.
You're right.
They look to other people to try to see, like, well, what are we supposed to be doing? How should we act? What are the things that we should be engaging in? And so I think just because out of somewhere somebody starts saying, particularly if it's someone who has a very large, prominent, popular platform in spirituality, and they say, hey, you guys, I discovered this new thing, which is not new, by the way. Don't ever believe that. Then people go, oh, yeah, I should be doing that too. And they don't stop and think about, like, wait a minute, hold up, sister, where did you get this from? What is the history behind it? And should we really all be doing it? And I think it's about spirituality. It's also about having a particular meaning to something. If you're just doing it because the spiritual teacher said so, but there's no context, no history, no citation or explanation about it, and it's not even something that you really gravitate to, it's just kind of like the thing now, or it's become trendy, it's devoid of any purpose or meaning. And so what I would encourage people to do, because I do think there is this sense of, I guess, listlessness or a void that people are trying to fill, is go and look at, like, not only what you're drawn to, but look at your history. We all have ancestors. We all have these divine, sacred lineages and practices that we go to, that we come from. And so look at that and go, like, okay. And I mean, I have seen some people. I've seen a number of people, like, for example, in across multiple cultures. But one thing that I could think of is there are a number of neo-pagan or pagan people that are going back to their, like, Scandinavian and Germanic roots to go, like, oh, yeah, this is where I'm descended from. And these are the gods and goddesses and practices of, like, my ancestors. And I'm going into that. And the same thing of, like, other people of African descent who are leaving mainstream religions, particularly Christianity, and going back to indigenous African religions and spiritualities.
Yeah, and by all means, go for it.
Yeah, and so I think it's about, looking at yourself and looking, like, what's meaningful to you instead of feeling this pressure, because I think that there is a lot of pressure in contemporary spirituality to conform.
Yes, I completely agree. And what you were saying about social proof, that really clicked with me, because I remember reading, there's a spiritual business coach out here, and I've taken a few courses, and to improve my business and improve the way that I can serve my clients over the years. And I was considering taking a course from her. And on her website, she talked about going to South America, someplace in South America, and it was a part of this introduction of her bio. I have been here, I have been there, I have retched in paroxysms of spiritual ecstasy. Like she was talking about throwing up using the ayahuasca. And I'm like, what? Like that just that one line wrote her off for me. And I have not quite been able to explain why that was so repellent to me. Like, just, it felt so wrong. But that's exactly what it was, is she was using that as social proof.
Right. And I think, for me, I guess, like, another example that I can point from my life is, I've always had a connection to spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that within my family has always just been, everybody has their story of, seeing spirits or angels, and it's just seen as being accepted. But particularly when I started to recognize, like, okay, this is real and it's not simply, like, fanciful. It was through one of my ancestors, particularly, again, my maternal great-grandmother, who, passed in the early 90s, when I was, like, a really young child, who came to me and who really helped give me that extra push, in addition to, other loved ones that passed in spirit and other entities that made it, like, gave me that connection. And then, it's interesting, because actually, like, in multiple readings, like, as I started formally training, there would be multiple people would be like, oh, yeah, your great-grandmother's here, and she says, like, you get all of your stuff from her. And I'm like, yeah, I know.
Yep.
I know. Yep. I get it from her.
It's so funny. Your great-grandmother and my great-grandmother, sometimes the psychic stuff skips a little bit, but it's so funny.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing. And so, I think there is value. And for me, that's been very beautiful, of being able not only have that family connection, but through that family connection, like, it's from her that I've learned so much about our heritage and our family's lineage that I wasn't able to get, from documentation, because that documentation isn't really accessible or readily available.
Yeah.
Of being able to understand, like, I not only have a history, but I have a spiritual home. And, I'm still learning about that, and I expect that I'm going to continue to learn about that for as long as I live, and perhaps even after I return to, spirit. But I think that there's great beauty and great meaning of being able to connect to spirit in that way that's very personal. And I think that I would encourage people, because here's the thing, there are a lot of people right now that are just focused primarily on making bank in spirituality. And I want to make this very clear, especially as someone who's also a psychic medium. In addition to being in the field of clinical psychology, I understand we all got to eat. We all got to pay bills. And, I think that people deserve to be compensated for all of their time, energy, and work that they put in it. But when the primary focus is just on making money and on providing false or unsubstantiated promises about having these miraculous healings or spiritual experiences, I think that that's misleading. I think that's irresponsible.
And things can go sideways really quickly in a practice like that.
Oh, yeah, it can. And I think, basically, I would encourage people to just, like, go through, like, I know it's a very kind of time-consuming process, and perhaps it's not as sexy as some of the stuff that's being presented most often in spirituality, but to just, like, really focus on doing the research, doing the work, not only the inner work and outer work, but just basically having a thorough understanding of what you believe and why you believe in it, as opposed to just, like, grasping onto straws or just doing something because somebody that has, like, the most followers on Instagram says that you should do it, because there's also a lot of that, people who tout that, they are experts, and it's like, really, in what?
Yeah.
What?
Well, because that's a part of the business model in this field now, is you have to position yourself as an expert, even if you're not. Or even, you're going to be an expert by calling yourself an expert because that's so much of how I like to approach this. Is I don't like to approach by saying, I try to not talk in absolutes, and I always say, keep your brain plugged in, and I am not, I'm not the end-all be-all authority. I will share my experiences and, what I think and what feels good to me and what works for me based on my experiences and my history, but I've never been prescriptive about it. And I think it's important to question when people are being prescriptive about spiritual practices, any spiritual practice, because everyone's spiritual journey is different. And I loved what you said earlier about finding your spiritual home. And I think that's really... It's an inviting journey. It sounds like it can be a lonely journey, though, too, because when you're working to find your spiritual home, first you have to tap into that sense of homelessness, in a way. You have to go back and find it. And do you connect with your physical ancestors at all? And because sometimes those connections aren't there. Sometimes adoption gets in the way, and there's lots of other things that can happen. And so there's a path for everyone, but no, I don't think anyone's path looks the same. And I think that as long as we're working to listen to each other's experiences and actually learn from each other, being quiet long enough to hear what other people are saying and to sit with it for a while, and to practice compassion and to examine ourselves and move into that discomfort. When we feel discomfort, not shy away from it, but instead sit with it, move into it. Maybe we have to leave for a little bit and come back, but don't ignore that, because that's where the real growth happens.
Yeah, and I think I agree completely with everything that you said, and I think I really want to highlight that piece of people moving away from things or toward things out of a sense of discomfort, which goes back again to spiritual bypassing, of kind of smothering that pain, smothering that suffering. And, I think that all people, nobody, regardless of your background, is immune to pain and suffering. I think it's just a part of being a human being. But it's about what we do with that pain and suffering that counts. And I think that's important of, you don't want to exacerbate that pain and suffering by avoiding it by all costs, which is typically what happens, I think, a lot in spirituality, of people who there's so much talk about, people trying to overcome their trauma and their wounds and all of this stuff, which I understand, whether it be physical illness or mental illness or, just feeling alone and isolated in the world. None of that's fun. Nobody wants to actually experience that. But at the same time, I think it's important to move with the pain, to move with it as opposed to moving against it and, covering it up. Also, I do agree with you, and I think it's important for people to realize there are no absolutes. There aren't any absolutes. I mean, I think that all of us can have these very enriching and validating experiences, ideas, and we try to define them and interpret them the best ways that we can. But for anybody to try to make the claim or even suggest, either in word or deed, that they have the drop on what truth is and on what all the answers regarding life and spirit are, I think that's a fallacy. And
that's
I think that
big red flag.
Big red flag. And I guess one of my other concerns is that there's a lot of I'm going to use the C word, charlatans in the field, which I know people are very sensitive to, because I think as spiritual practitioners, a lot of us from the get-go deal with skepticism and people who are just you don't know what you're doing and you're just trying to run a ruse on people. But there are a lot of people who are manipulating and exploiting other people for their own gain. And there are people who are willingly and easily submitting to other people and to particular leaders in the field without objection and without questioning, and it's doing a lot of harm, and it's getting scary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know? It is. Keep your brains plugged in, people.
Keep your brains
plugged in, because it's things start to go off the rails. I've seen a couple of things, like I followed some blogs, some other people that I end up unfollowing after a couple of years when things start to really go off the rails, and so conspiracy theories start to leak in, or you start to see a political agenda that starts to leak in. It's interesting how the more detailed a self-proclaimed, a spiritual leader, or whenever there's a system to get absolute answers out, it's interesting how biases start to creep out after a little while. And so if you sit back and you watch for those biases, they'll happen. Usually they'll happen. And it's interesting. I've been interested in Zen Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism for a number of years, and my mother converted. And so I'm used to the style of teaching that the lamas will provide, which is so often asking you to look inward and asking you in a way to answer your own spiritual questions, and they're there to help guide you along that path, versus what is really popular, or what it seems to be prominent in popular culture, which is, I'm going to write a book on what heaven is like. This is what heaven is like.
This is the law.
Yeah, this is what it's like for everyone.
And I don't think, and I agree, and I think that's why for a little while, and it's only been more recently that I've been more vocal about it, is I've kind of felt alienated by contemporary spirituality, just because of those kind of things. Where,
me too.
Like you.
Me too, Lana. Me too. Let's sit on the sidelines together and eat popcorn.
And eat popcorn and drink beer.
Oh dear.
Oh geez, but no, I think like you. There were certain blogs or platforms that I followed initially, and then I was like, I'm out. I can't do it. Just because there is this creeping in of conspiracy theories and paranoia and distrust and a certain particular agenda. And I mean, I think here's the thing that I want to make clear too, is that by virtue of being a human being, you have a bias. In fact, in my clinical psychology training as a part of ethics, we were taught you all have biases, and that's just a part of being a human being, and biases aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves. But when those biases go unchecked, you have a greater risk of doing harm to other people, which in the field of clinical psychology, doing harm is one of the general ethical principles that we are supposed to not do. We're not supposed to do harm to people.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of power that people can grasp onto and wield by virtue of saying, I am connected to God.
Yes.
A particular spirit or entity that's telling me this. And there are a lot of people that will phrase it in a way, even if they try to deny it, that they are phrasing it or that they are presenting it in a way as if this is the absolute truth. It's coming from spirit. There's nothing we see that's coming through in this. And it's there is no way that you can have a 100% pure filter.
Yeah.
You are going to have your, and so the only way that you can try to make sure that you don't do harm as much as possible is being aware of what your trigger points are, what your biases are, what informs your worldview, your values, your perspectives, your morals, your ethical principles. What do you believe about yourself, others, in the world at a core belief level?
Yeah. I love how this is turning into a practice, an ethics practice in mediumship as well.
Yeah. We don't talk about this shit ever.
We don't.
Never.
Can we sidetrack and talk about ethics a bit? Because I put out an audio class a while ago, and I spend at least 2 hours talking about ethics in it. And I'm saying that to people, not, because people will sometimes go, oh, ethics, boring. Ethics are easy. Just do no harm. But there's so much in that concept of don't harm people, that you have to you have to raise your awareness of how you can inadvertently cause harm through your biases. And as a medium, it's so easy to impose your bias because it's all about when you're translating that energy, how that energy is going to translate in your mind. It's filtering through who you are. It's filtering through your life experiences and your biases. So it's inevitable you're going to have to check your own biases as much as you can.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to talk about ethics and practice. Like, one of the things I found that I tend to talk about in quite a bit when it comes in relation to spirituality. So I think, and for me, I think that for everybody, when you're just starting to discover that you can actually connect to spirit, like you do things that are unethical. I think like everybody does.
Yes.
And then what happens is only through the practice of it, because unfortunately it seems like a lot of ethics is based on the fact that people made mistakes, especially in the field of clinical psychology. All of our ethics came from the fact that there were people who fucked up.
Yeah.
And then we were like, oh yeah, you can't do that to people because it causes this, this, and this to happen. So I think that similarly in spirituality or any other kind of field, when you're going through the ethical process, it's because you look at past mistakes and ways at which people have been harmed.
Yeah.
And really parsing that apart and going like, okay, well, now that we know this is what we're going to do to prevent that from happening again. And I mean, when it comes to unethical things that I've seen happen in spirituality, I mean, it includes things like reading people either for psychic readings or mediumship readings without their permission.
Yep. Big time. And surprising them with it.
Oh, yeah.
Uninvited readings.
Uninvited readings, talking about people. Let's see, another thing, particularly right now, because talking to celebrity spirits or public spirits has become in vogue or very pervasive, of kind of basically exploiting these spirits, basically. Like using their fame to also go with your business. I mean, I've seen mediums who claim to be like the only exclusive channel for a particular spirit that just so happens to be famous. In fact, there's like one medium that I can think of that in every single post that they made of like these alleged celebrity channelings that they did, they said that they and perhaps maybe one other medium were the only ones that were actually talking to these spirits.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, that's weird.
Yeah.
Also, like that, like laying claim to a spirit. Basically.
There you go. Yeah. Laying claim.
Laying claim as if you can possess them.
Did I ever mention, I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned or if you came across mentioning of the Lana. So, because, I mean, I'm sure you know that I've done celebrity channelings and I still do. And it comes up and, you know, and I'd certainly be open to your feedback if you feel that there are times that I've crossed the line because I'm learning, absolutely. But one of the very first ones was John Lennon. And not knowing anything about John Lennon, it was actually a great learning experience for me because I didn't know anything about him, yet there was lots of information out there, so it was easy for me to get validation. But one of the things that happened is apparently there are so many people that have spoken to John Lennon over the years that there's this exclusive club called the Lennonites. They've dubbed themselves the Lennonites, and they have sole ownership of John Lennon. And so it's like that kind of phenomenon, that laying claim to a particular spirit and claiming that you're the only one that's going to, or that you or this little group are the only ones that are truly connected. It doesn't jive with the sense of generosity that comes in spirit, especially with someone who is, you know, who was famous, who had a lot to say in their life and had a lot of people that they connected with. Why would they now restrict themselves to one or two official mediums? Of course, they want to talk to everybody that can talk to them, and because there's no restriction on their time or their space or any. Why would they put any restrictions on themselves?
Yeah, I think the way that I look, particularly when we're talking about human spirits, is that I think that they don't lose their humanness necessarily. So I think like any particular spirit, like their personality traits or characteristics their interests, their proclivities, their preferences, that all of those stay, you know? And I, like, my perception is the way that I relate to spirits who were human, you know, is the same way that I would relate to an incarnate human being. Of, you know, just being like, oh, hey, how are you? You know, what's your story?
Yeah.
You know, what you're interested in. Like, you know, just basic getting to know somebody stuff. And, you know, it applies to all spirits that were human, whether they were famous or not. But I think, like, there's a dangerous thing that can go in the sense of exclusivity of, I think it taps into, like, feelings of self-worth. I think it also taps into feelings of wanting to be special. Because, like, let's put the spiritual side of, down for a second. Like, let's look at the fact of how we, in general, as regular human beings, treat celebrities and how we've been conditioned to treat celebrities. We treat celebrities as if they are gods. We treat celebrities as if they are somehow preternaturally special compared to the rest of us. And that by somehow being in connection to them, like, it can make us special and worthy and give us all these wonderful opportunities that otherwise we wouldn't have, or that it speaks to who we are as people to have, like, this close, like, proximity with this person that's famous or well known. And I think that some of that bleeds over into the channeling of celebrity spirits, of, you know, this idea that, like, oh, I'm so wonderful because I have this, you know, I've channeled or have this special connection with this person. And, you know, like you, I think I find it hard to believe that someone who has reached so many people would just have a small select group of people that they would talk to and that they wouldn't talk to anybody else. And so I think, like, again, you have to look at, like, what are the, like, what led that person to that conclusion? And again, not doing it in this kind of vicious attack way, but also thinking critically about it, basically. It's like, well, what are the experiences? What's the information that you got that is leading you to believe that you are, like, one of these select few who's talking to John Lennon or to any other particular spirit? And then going through that process, that way people can understand, like, okay, why are you doing this? Because that's another thing. There's not enough critical thinking. People either...
Critical thinking, please.
Critical thinking, please. Because, like, your brain is there for a reason. Like, you wouldn't...
Exactly. Your brain is there for a reason. Keep it plugged in.
Keep it plugged in. And I think people basically vacillate between these two extremes. Either this idea that people just immediately believe something that somebody says without questioning it. Or even when it comes to them personally channeling a spirit, they just will, like, whatever drops into their head, they just immediately interpret it in a particular way. Or people will viciously attack something that goes against their beliefs or what they like, or, you know, what their perception of spirit is. And there isn't, like, room for people to just be like, okay, well, this is what's happening. I don't have a full grasp of it, but, you know, I'm open to figure it out and to collect information as I go along to get a better understanding of it. Or, you know, just basically being able to call bullshit when it's apparent. I mean, there's a concept in dialectical behavior therapy about validation, and particularly this idea of validation as a way of, like, you want to be able to understand why a person is having a certain belief or presenting a certain position, so that you can reach this level of mutual understanding while at the same time retaining your own beliefs and your own understanding of why you're presenting this other position. But there's this very important caveat, which is validate the valid. So if there's something that's clearly, like, there is concrete evidence to show, and from credible sources, not just some, like, dude that's running a conspiracy theory blog in his mother's basement, but, like, a credible source that's saying that's not true, then we need to be able to go, like, okay, like, you're saying this, but, like, it's just not true. Like, I can present the information to you that shows that that's not true. But unfortunately, that's also another issue in spirituality where like there isn't even really the room.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so
talk
strange.
About that. There isn't really the room where people basically, it is either this, like people just immediately believe things that are becoming more and more outlandish by the day.
Yeah.
Or if you are one of the few people that stands up and goes, this doesn't feel right, or I don't think that's true, or I know for a fact this isn't true, that you're viciously attacked. And so there isn't really room for questioning or thought. People are just kind of going between one pole or the other, and it's concerning because it's made me think, like, where are we going as a community? Like, where is it going to go? Because I think that if we aren't careful, either spirituality is going to lose any value that it has, or it's going to become a haven for cults. Or, you know, other people that are just going to be doing these awful things and, you know, just, again, just using all of these vague platitudes to try to justify it.
Yeah, I really want people to keep their brains plugged in, you know, to help resist the slide into what is, you know, really getting to be more and more ludicrous sometimes, but also so that people can protect themselves, giving people permission to protect themselves. Because there's sometimes this environment that's created, and it's not just spirituality, it's, you know, there's any sort of more extreme sect or cult, or, you know, where the permission to speak out or to voice what feels uncomfortable or what you're concerned with or what you're questioning, that the space to voice that gets smaller and smaller. And that's another big red flag. If you don't have space in your community to speak out and talk about things that are bothering you, and you don't have people that are going to respect you enough to sit with what you're saying and listen to it and hold some space for it, create some silence around it, really take it in. You know, if there's not that space in the community, then how can healing happen? How can growth happen?
And I don't know. I mean, I think the only way that we could do is like with conversations like this taking place and taking place in a public manner, because I think that I would venture to guess that after this, there's going to be a number of people. Obviously, there are going to be some people who are upset and take issue with it, but also there are going to be some people who are like, oh, thank God, I thought I was the only one that felt this way about this. And I think that the more that people are able to come out and talk about the things that they truly feel, even if they don't have this like thesis or this like well-formed, you know, ideology behind it, but they're just like, you know, this is what's been going on and this is how I've been feeling and I'm still trying to make sense of it. I think that more and more people are going to come up, and I just want people to be able to, like you said, like we were saying earlier in the conversation, think holistically, but also to be able to truly put compassion and love into action by being able to also heal and recognize and identify the things that are causing sickness in the community, that are causing pain and suffering in the community. Because I think that there's hope, and I definitely do believe that spirituality has the opportunity to continue to thrive and be something that's a vital role in people's lives. But I think that we're at a very important point in spirituality where we have to kind of decide, like, are we going to just let anything go, even if it means people are brutally harmed, or are we going to have these really difficult conversations and intervene in the best possible ways that we can?
That's such a perfect conclusion to this conversation, Lana.
Thank you.
I can't adequately express how much I've enjoyed this conversation and how much admiration and respect I have for you. Thank you so much for sharing your education, your research, and your own thoughts and experiences as a medium and as a clinical psychologist. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm technically not a clinical psychologist.
Future clinical psychologist?
future clinical psychologist, current postdoctoral fellow. I do hold a doctorate in clinical psychology. You can call me Dr. Lana if you're nasty.
Dr. Lana, may I?
Yes, you may call me.
Can I title the episode Dr. Lana?
Oh, yeah, you can totally do that.
I'm doing it.
Do it.
Totally
we cover so much. We cover so much in episode, but also just to let people know when it comes to the resources, because I'm a big nerd. I do believe in being transparent about where I get my information from, particularly when it comes to the conversation dealing with the topic of cultural appropriation and spirituality. There were several resources that I drew from, and I sent them to the wonderful Kate Sitka here. So, I presume that she's going to make those available. So that if you guys want to check it out for yourself, you can.
Check the notes in this episode description, and I will post links, or if they're PDFs, I will post the copies on my blog as well. I will make all of that available. I hope that we can find reason to have another conversation like this.
Of course we will. Of course we will.
Because this is going to be ongoing, and I didn't even get through half these comments. But that's actually totally okay, because another friend of mine has stepped up to help me tackle this. So there's going to be another episode a little later on about this, and you can hear me and my friend Andrea tackle some similar comments. I feel like my ability to verbalize things is kind of grinding down, because it takes a lot of energy to tackle this subject matter, and I'm so glad that I had help.
Oh, no, you're welcome. And I thank you so much for giving me this opportunity and platform as well to be a part of this community and to share this, like, a little known fact. When I was just like a little baby spiritual person, I one of the first blogs I actually followed was yours.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I am honored and flattered. And I was a totally baby spiritual person when I started that thing too. That's why it's still called Psychic in Training, because the training never ends.
Oh no, the training for sure doesn't end. But I remember I was like, Kate is amazing, and I really love her work.
Aww.
Yeah. So this has come full circle, because I would have with you, and there are also some other great spiritual practitioners out there that I started just following your work, and then had the opportunity to get to know you and work with you, and even in some cases befriend people. So that's really, really cool. And then also, can I do a little plug?
Please do.
Yeah, so in addition to working in the field of clinical psychology, I also am a psychic medium. So if you're interested in following and supporting my work, you can go to my website, www.lanahomesmedium.com. You can also go to my Instagram and Facebook professional pages at Lana Holmes Medium. So Lana like Lana Del Rey, Holmes like Sherlock, and then Medium like the skies.
That's awesome. And I'm going to put links. I'll put links in the show notes and links on my blog as well, so people can check it out.
All right. Super fantastic. But, this was amazing. I just feel like I want to go up to British Columbia and drink tea with you.
I think that you should. I think you should come out here. We can go to the hot springs. I mean, just come out here, spend at least a few days. We can go out to the hot springs. We can soak up some of that lithium. We can watch some whales and see some eagles and say hi to some seals, and hang out on the beach and watch the sunrises and sunsets and let the ocean breeze blow off all of the bullshit.
Oh no, that's amazing. So it's where are concluding words for this? There's bullshit. Don't be a dick. Also, let's see, use your brain, plug in your brain.
Keep your brain plugged in, yeah.
Keep your brain plugged in, and also, those herbs they have there in Africa.
The best voodoo herbs are from Africa.
That seriously has to be a meme. Somebody has to do it.
We need to make it be a meme.
Make it be a meme. Oh, God.
Oh, man. I don't even know where to begin with that one. Oh, we'll try. We'll try. Send me something.
But it's just... we will do that, but I mean, sometimes, man, we try so hard to be serious, but sometimes you just gotta laugh.
Oh well, I think that must be what it's there for. we have to have to laugh, but laughter is sacred too. Laughter is a part. Laughter, I believe, is an important part of spiritual practice. And, because it uplifts everything. It relieves things. And I mean, working in the hospital, I've seen people who are, preparing to die from very painful conditions, yet can still find things to laugh about. And so I think when you bring laughter into dark places, that's being a light worker.
Yes, I think so. Or a merrymaker.
Yeah.
Merry prankster. I like those as well.
I like sacred clown as well.
Sacred clown, yes. So I can totally see that.
Well, I'm so reluctant to end this conversation, but if we keep talking, it's going to be 3 episodes instead of 2. As it is, I'm going to have to split it into 2.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. And so I'm totally looking forward to it. Thank you so much. I love you, Kate.
I love you too, Lana. Thank you so much. Again, I can't express how appreciative I am. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome. I feel equally appreciative. This was so amazing. I almost kind of forgot that people were going to listen to this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're probably going to have, I'm going to take the music over this part, but I'm like, it's about talking on the podcast. It's kind of equivalent to talking to about 100 to 150 people in a room. I have a very small podcast following, but they're highly engaged, and it's not much. When you talk about podcasts, people think about thousands or even millions of listeners, and I'm like, you know what? I have my 100 to 200 people, depending on the episode, and I'm pleased they're listening. And that's nothing to sneeze at. We just had a conversation in front of 150 people that are paying attention, and then more as time goes on, right? Because this lives on the internet for a long time, and who knows what happens in the future. Because my older episodes have gotten a lot more plays because as more people discover, they go back through the archives. So this is becoming an addition to the body of our work.
For sure.
Thanks for the heavy lifting. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, too, sis.
All right. You have a wonderful day, and be in touch. Be in touch if you find out a way to make a meme. I've got to think about it. How can I make that into a meme? I'm trying to now. Challenge accepted.
Take a picture of like a very self-righteous white woman. With glasses and a haircut, just being like, those birds they have out in Africa with that voodoo.
I could literally use the profile picture of the girl that said this.
I know, but I don't want to
I wouldn't, but yeah. Or I could use Stephen Phoenix's profile picture because he's literally got his shirt off in it.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
like a spiritual hunk.
Yeah,
he's like Fabio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because he's got spiritual biceps. And spiritual pecs.
Yes, but God can't make your dick longer.
Oh! Oh my God, we need to have Skype tea sometime.
We do. We need to have Skype tea.
Okay, my friend. Thank you again. I'm going to thank you 100 times.
You're welcome. Thank you. And so, with that, I will let you gracefully close this conversation.
You have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk again. This is I think this is our first conversation, but it's going to be far from our last. I think we're going to go on for years. I think that's why I'm so hesitant to break the connection. I'm just like, this is good. I don't want to hang up the phone, but I must.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, have a wonderful day, and good luck with your studies. You're going to kill it because you certainly killed this. Yeah. And I'll see you on the internet.
For sure.
Bye-bye.
That's it for this episode of the Joyful Telepathy Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to book a session with me, click on the link in this episode's description or visit tophenoPsychic.com. And you, my dear listener, please use coupon code PODCAST. That's coupon code podcast for $20 off your first session. Until next time, be well and take care of each other.